The scream came from the east wing before dawn, sharp enough to tear through stone walls and startle every bird from the trees outside. Damian Ashgrove was already awake. He had not slept, not really, not since the letter arrived 3 nights ago confirming his wedding date. He rose from his bed, pulled on a plain grey shirt that belonged to no king, and walked toward a mirror that had seen him crowned, mourning, and now, uncertain. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Parks, ruler of lands that stretched from the frozen ridges to the river valleys, and in 11 days he was set to marry a woman he had never once met in person. Lady Seraphina Cole. Her name had been spoken in council chambers like a blessing. Kind, they said. Gentle, they said. Beloved by her people, adored by her staff, a woman who would make a perfect Luna. Damian did not trust perfect. He had learned, in 3 years of ruling alone since his father's death, that the people who sounded too flawless in letters were often hiding something behind their smiles. Every park elder who praised Seraphina did so with the same rehearsed words, as if they had all read from the same script. That alone unsettled him more than any flaw could have. He called for Cassius before the sun had fully risen. His beta arrived already dressed, hair still damp, boots half-laced, because when the king summoned you before breakfast, you did not take time to look presentable. I need a favor, Damian said, and I need you to not talk me out of it. Cassius folded his arms. That already tells me I should talk you out of it. I'm going to her estate, Damian said. Not as myself. Cassius blinked. You're going to sneak into your own fiancé's household. I'm going to see who she really is before I bind my life to hers, Damian said. Everyone tells me she's wonderful. Nobody tells me anything real. I want to see her without the crown watching. And if she finds out, she won't. I still have the old gift from my mother's bloodline. I can dull my scent, change how I carry myself, enough to pass as a servant for a few weeks. Cassius exhaled slowly, the way he always did before agreeing to something reckless. You're the king of an entire nation, and you want to carry firewood. I want the truth, Damian said. There's a difference. By midday, the king was gone, and in his place walked a servant named Ren, plain-faced, quiet-eyed, carrying nothing but a worn bag and a forged letter of transfer that Cassius had arranged through a contact in the stable guild. Nobody questioned a new hand arriving at Seraphina Cole's estate. Servants came and went. Nobody looked twice at people who were meant to be invisible. That was exactly what Damian was counting on. The estate itself was beautiful in a way that felt built for show. Tall white pillars, gardens trimmed into perfect shapes, fountains that ran even when no one important was watching them. Damian had grown up around wealth, and he knew the difference between wealth that served people and wealth that simply displayed itself. This felt like the second kind. He was assigned to the stables first, which suited him. Horses did not lie, did not perform, did not pretend to be something they were not for an audience. As he walked, he listened. Servants talked more freely around someone new, someone who didn't yet know who mattered and who didn't. Just don't let her catch you moving slow, an older groundskeeper warned him on his first afternoon, tightening a saddle strap without looking up. She smiles pretty in front of guests, but she's got a temper when no one important is around to see it. Damian fired that away. One comment meant nothing. Servants complained about every employer. But he had learned, in ruling a kingdom, that patterns mattered more than single sentences. He saw her for the first time later that day, from a distance, across the courtyard. Seraphina Cole was, without question, beautiful. Dark hair pulled into an elegant twist, a gown the color of dusk, a posture so straight it looked practiced rather than natural. She moved like someone who knew she was being watched at all times, and adjusted herself accordingly. She was speaking to a young maid, and even from where Damian stood, he could see the maid's shoulders curling inward, her head bowing lower with every passing second. Seraphina's voice did not rise. She did not shout. But something in her tone made the maid flinch as if she had. Damian moved closer, pretending to carry a bundle of hay toward the side entrance, close enough now to hear. This gown was pressed wrong, Seraphina said, holding up a deep blue dress. I specifically said no creases near the collar. I'm sorry, my lady, I'll fix it right away. You'll fix it, Serafina repeated, after I've already had to see it wrong. Do you understand how that reflects on me? If a guest had seen this, they would think I don't know how to run my own household. It won't happen again. No, Serafina said, voice cool and final, it won't. Because you're not doing the wardrobe anymore. Send Priya instead. Perhaps she can manage something as simple as a wrinkle. The maid's eyes glistened, but she said nothing, only nodded and hurried away with the dress clutched to her chest like something precious being taken from her. Damien kept walking, kept his head down, kept his expression blank the way servants were trained to keep it. But inside, something had shifted. This was not cruelty in its loudest form. There was no shouting, no violence, nothing anyone could point to as clearly wrong. And that was what troubled him most. This was cruelty dressed as discipline, quiet enough that it could hide in plain sight for years, invisible to anyone who wasn't standing close enough to feel its weight. He told himself it was one moment. One frustrated woman on one difficult afternoon. Everyone had a bad day. Even kings had bad days. He had no right to judge a person's entire character from a single conversation about a dress. But over the following days, the pattern did not break. It only grew clearer. He watched Serafina dismiss a boy from the kitchen staff for bringing tea 2 minutes late, without asking whether something had gone wrong in the kitchen that delayed him. He watched her praise a nobleman's daughter effusively during a garden visit, using words like gracious and warm and thoughtful, the very words the Park Council had used to describe Serafina herself, and Damien began to wonder how many of those glowing reports had come from people who had simply never seen what happened once the guest went home. He watched her smile at an elderly steward while sending a private note behind his back requesting his replacement, citing his age as a liability to the estate's appearance. Each incident was small. Each one, alone, might have been forgivable, explainable, a bad mood, a stressful week. But together, they built something undeniable. A woman who ruled her small kingdom of servants with a smile in public and a blade in private, cutting away anyone who inconvenienced her image. Damien began giving her chances without her knowing it. When a serving cart was overloaded and about to spill in front of a visiting dignitary, he quietly caught it and rearranged the dishes before anyone noticed the near disaster, sparing the young server responsible from Serafina's attention entirely. When laundry went missing before an important dinner, he found it himself, mud stained from a fallen basket, and cleaned it quietly rather than let the maid responsible take the blame. He was not testing Serafina directly. He was testing whether kindness, once given a chance to exist without witnesses, would appear anywhere in her house. It never did. Every opportunity for mercy passed by untouched, while every opportunity for control was seized immediately. By the end of the first week, Damien understood something with total clarity. He was not looking at a woman with a difficult personality. He was looking at a woman who needed cruelty to feel powerful, and had simply learned how to wear kindness as a costume whenever anyone with influence was watching. The question that kept him awake that night, lying in a narrow servant's cot instead of a royal bed, was not whether Serafina was cruel. He already knew that answer. The question was how many people already knew it too, and had simply been too afraid to say so. He thought of the maid with the wrinkled gown, the boy dismissed over tea, the old steward quietly replaced. All of them silent, all of them swallowing their pain because speaking against a future queen was not a risk anyone in their position could afford to take. Damien closed his eyes that night, still wearing the plain grey shirt of a man named Ren, and made a quiet promise to himself. Whatever he discovered in this house, whatever truth waited beneath Serafina Cole's practiced smile, he would not look away from it simply because a council needed a peace treaty, or because 11 days was not enough time to undo a wedding already announced across 2 kingdoms. He had come here to learn who his future wife truly was. He had a feeling, deep and unshakable, that he was only beginning to understand how far that truth would take him, and how much it would cost the people who had no crown to protect them. Outside his window, the estate glittered under moonlight, fountains still running, gardens still perfect, every inch of it built to convince the world that nothing here was broken. Damien had learned enough in 1 week to know that beauty built on silence was the most dangerous kind of lie a kingdom could ever tell itself. And he had 10 days left to find out exactly how deep that lie went. Damien had been at the estate for 9 days when he first learned her name. He was carrying a stack of linens down a narrow corridor near the servants' quarters, moving quickly because Serafina had recently taken to timing how long errands took, when a young woman stepped out of a side room and nearly collided with him. She caught herself, caught the linens before they could fall, and looked up with an apology already forming on her lips. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going," she said. "Neither was I," Damien answered, and something about the honesty in her tone made him actually look at her properly, rather than simply nodding and moving on the way servants often did with each other, too tired and too cautious to build connections in a place where anyone could be dismissed without warning. She had light brown hair pulled back in a simple braid, sharp intelligent eyes, and hands that looked like they had done more work than her age should have required. There was a steadiness to her, a calm that felt out of place inside a house where everyone else moved like they were bracing for something. "You're new," she said. "I'm Ren. I work close to Lady Serafina, mostly her private chambers and her correspondence." "Ren," Damien said, offering the closest version of the truth he was permitted to give. "Started in the stables. Moved to general errands last week." "That's a fast promotion," Ren said, a small curious smile forming. "Most people wait months before they're trusted near the main house." "Maybe I'm good at looking useful. Or maybe you're good at not being noticed," Ren said, and there was nothing unkind in the observation, only a quiet perceptiveness that told Damien she paid closer attention to people than most did. "That's a skill in a house like this. The ones who get noticed usually don't stay long." He wanted to ask what she meant by that, but she was already moving past him, balancing a tray of correspondence, disappearing around the corner before he could form the question. It was a small exchange, barely a minute long, but Damien found himself thinking about it for the rest of the day, turning her words over the way he might turn over a piece of evidence in a council dispute. The ones who get noticed usually don't stay long. He began watching Ren the way he had been watching Serafina, not out of suspicion this time, but out of a growing curiosity he didn't fully understand yet. What he found was a woman who moved through the household like water, finding the path of least resistance, careful, controlled, but never cold. She helped an exhausted kitchen girl finish her shift without being asked. She covered for a stable hand who had overslept, quietly rearranging his morning tasks so no one higher up would notice the delay. She spoke to everyone, from the newest servant to the head steward, with the exact same level of respect, as if rank meant nothing to her at all. It was during his second week that Damien learned Ren's full story, pieced together from careful conversations rather than direct questions, because he sensed she was not someone who volunteered her past easily. Her family had once held a respectable position among the healers of a smaller park territory to the east. Her mother had trained her in herbal remedies and wound care from the time she could walk, and Ren had been on track to become a healer herself, respected and needed in her community. But a series of debts, inherited from an uncle's failed business dealings, had crushed the family's finances within a single terrible year. Unable to pay what was owed, and facing the loss of their home, Ren's parents had made the difficult choice to send her into service at Serafina Cole's estate, where the wages, though modest, were steady enough to slowly repay what the family owed. She had been here for nearly 2 years. Long enough to understand exactly how the household worked, and long enough to become skilled at protecting herself and others from its sharper edges. Damien began to understand why she had described the estate the way she had. Ren was not naive about Serafina's temperament. She had simply learned to survive it, quietly, without drawing attention, all while still finding small ways to soften its impact on the people around her. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into his disguise, Damien found himself assigned to serve at a private dinner Serafina was hosting for a visiting noblewoman from a neighboring territory. He stood along the wall with the other serving staff, trained to remain still and silent unless summoned, and watched as Serafina performed her most polished version of herself. She laughed at the right moments. She complimented the noblewoman's jewelry, her travels, her opinions on trade agreements between the parks. She spoke of her future husband, the Alpha King, with a warmth that sounded, to anyone who didn't know better, entirely genuine. "I've heard he's quite serious," the noblewoman said, sipping her wine. "Some say cold, even." "He simply carries the weight of his kingdom," Serafina replied smoothly. "I intend to be the warmth beside that weight. Every king needs someone soft enough to balance his hardness." Damien nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of hearing himself described this way by a woman who had dismissed 3 servants that same week for offenses no larger than timing and appearance. He kept his expression perfectly still, the way years of court training had taught him, even as something cold settled in his chest. Later that night, after the dinner had ended and the noblewoman had retired to her guest chambers, Damien was clearing dishes from the private dining room when Serafina herself entered unexpectedly, likely checking that everything had been arranged to her exact standard before morning. She noticed him immediately. "You," she said. "The new one. Ren, is it?" "Yes, my lady." She studied him for a long moment, the way a merchant might study an item before deciding its value. "You're quiet. Most new staff talk too much when they're nervous." "You don't seem nervous at all." "I try to do my work well, my lady. Nothing more." "Refreshing," Serafina said, something calculating flickering behind her eyes. "Most people are either terrified of me or trying too hard to impress me. You're neither." Damien said nothing, which seemed to please her more than any response could have. Over the following days, Serafina began finding small reasons to keep him near her. A request to fetch something from the library that could easily have gone to any servant. A summons to stand nearby during her correspondence, ostensibly to assist, though there was little for him to actually do. Damien recognized the pattern immediately. It was not affection. It was curiosity, the same restless curiosity a collector feels towards something unusual they haven't yet decided how to categorize. He played the role carefully, polite but distant, competent but unremarkable, giving her nothing to fixate on beyond simple utility. But Serafina was observant in her own dangerous way, and it did not take long before her attention shifted from curiosity into something closer to possessiveness. The shift became impossible to ignore the evening she found him speaking quietly with Ren near the kitchen entrance, the two of them sharing a rare moment of unguarded laughter over something one of the kitchen boys had said earlier that day. Serafina's expression, when Damien glanced up and saw her watching from the corridor, was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was cold, calculating, and entirely too interested. "Ren," she called out, voice pleasant on the surface. "A word, please." Ren's laughter died instantly. She excused herself and followed Serafina down the hall, and Damien, unable to shake a growing sense of unease, found an excuse to linger nearby, close enough to hear fragments of the conversation drifting through a partially open door. "I've noticed you've become quite friendly with the new stable hand," Serafina said, her tone deceptively casual. "He's kind, my lady." "Nothing more than that. Kindness is a luxury, Ren. One I'm not certain your family's debts can afford you to indulge in, especially not with staff who haven't proven themselves yet. I'd hate for anything to distract you from your duties here. Or for anything to remind me that your family's arrangement with this house depends entirely on my continued goodwill." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. "I understand, my lady," Ren said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "Good," Serafina said. "I'd hate to have to reconsider things." Damien stood frozen in the corridor, every instinct in him urging him to step forward, to reveal himself, to end this cruelty with the authority he actually possessed. But he forced himself to remain still, reminding himself that revealing his identity now, before he had gathered enough undeniable truth, would only allow Serafina to construct an explanation, an apology, a performance convincing enough to salvage the wedding and bury everything he had witnessed. He needed more than a threat overheard through a door. He needed something undeniable, something that could not be explained away with charm and practiced tears. That night, lying awake in his narrow servant's bed, Damien found himself thinking not of Serafina's cruelty, which he had already fully understood, but of Ren's quiet steadiness in the face of it. She had not argued. She had not begged. She had simply absorbed the threat with the same calm control she brought to everything else, protecting herself the only way someone in her position could, by giving Serafina nothing further to use against her. He thought of how different she was from the woman he was supposed to marry in a matter of days, and the thought unsettled him more than he was prepared to admit. He had come to this estate looking for the truth about his future queen. He had not expected to find himself thinking, late at night, about someone else entirely, a servant girl with steady hands and steadier eyes, who carried the weight of her family's survival without ever once letting it turn her bitter or cruel toward the people around her. Damien did not yet know what to do with that thought. But he suspected, with a growing certainty that troubled him deeply, that it was not going to disappear on its own, no matter how many days remained before his wedding, and no matter how carefully he tried to keep his true purpose here separate from whatever was slowly beginning to grow in its place. 3 weeks into his disguise, Damien had learned to move through the estate like a shadow, present enough to complete his duties, invisible enough to avoid unnecessary attention, though avoiding Seraphina's attention entirely had become increasingly difficult. She had taken to summoning him for small tasks nearly every day, and each time, Damien felt the walls of his deception tightening around him, one polite conversation at a time. He had not planned to grow close to Ren. That had simply happened, in the quiet spaces between tasks, in the moments when the household slowed enough for two exhausted people to sit together and share a meal without pretense. She never asked him invasive questions about his past, never pushed him to reveal more than he offered. In turn, he found himself offering more than he intended. "You don't talk like a stable hand," Ren said one evening, as they sat together near the kitchen garden, the last light of day fading behind the estate's tall hedges. "What does a stable hand talk like?" "Simpler sentences. Less thinking before you speak." She studied him with the same sharp attentiveness she brought to everything. "You choose your words like someone used to being listened to." Damien felt his pulse quicken, not from fear of discovery, but from the unsettling accuracy of her observation. "Maybe I used to work somewhere that demanded more care with words." "Where?" "Somewhere far from here," he said, which was true enough to satisfy her without revealing anything false. Ren did not push further, though he sensed she suspected there was more beneath his careful answers. Instead, she simply nodded and returned her attention to the small bundle of herbs she was sorting, remnants of her old training as a healer that she still practiced quietly, treating minor cuts and fevers among the staff without ever mentioning it to Seraphina, who would likely have found some reason to punish such generosity. "Why do you still do this?" Damien asked, watching her separate the herbs with practiced fingers. "The healing. You could keep that knowledge to yourself. No one would blame you." "Because people here get hurt and have nowhere else to turn," Ren said simply. "If I have the skill to help and I choose not to, what good is the skill at all?" It was such a simple answer, delivered without any performance or expectation of praise, that Damien found himself momentarily unable to respond. He had spent 3 weeks watching a woman who dressed cruelty in silk and called it leadership. Sitting beside Ren now felt like breathing clean air after being trapped in smoke for far too long. Their closeness did not go unnoticed for long. Seraphina's suspicion, once sparked, only grew sharper with each passing day, and she began finding increasingly petty ways to separate them. She assigned Ren additional duties late into the evening, ensuring she had no free time to spend near the stables or gardens. She summoned Damien for tasks specifically during the hours he usually spent with Ren, as if testing whether he would obey her summons over anything else. He always obeyed, careful never to give her a reason for further suspicion, though the effort cost him more than he expected. He found himself resenting every minute spent standing beside Seraphina, comparing her calculated warmth to Ren's effortless honesty, and growing more certain with each passing day that the woman he was contracted to marry and the woman he was slowly, helplessly drawn to could not have been more different if the universe had designed them as opposites on purpose. The situation grew more dangerous when a young kitchen boy named Elias, no older than 14, accidentally broke a valuable serving dish while carrying it to a private meal Seraphina was hosting for visiting park elders from a rival territory, elders whose opinion mattered greatly to the fragile peace Damien's marriage was meant to secure. Seraphina's reaction was immediate and cold. She did not raise her voice in front of her guests, maintaining her composed exterior even as fury flickered behind her eyes. But the moment the elders had retired for the evening, she summoned Elias to her private study, and Damien, sensing danger, found an excuse to remain nearby. "Do you understand what that dish was worth?" Seraphina's voice, though quiet, carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "It was a gift from my grandmother. Do you understand what it means for me to lose something like that in front of people whose respect I need?" "I'm sorry, my lady. It slipped, I didn't mean." "I don't care what you meant," Seraphina said. "I care what happened." You'll work without wages for the next 2 months to cover the cost of replacing it, and you consider yourself fortunate that I'm not simply dismissing you outright. Elias, barely more than a child, nodded through visible tears, too afraid to argue, too dependent on his position here to risk making things worse. Damien felt something hot and furious rise in his chest, an anger he rarely allowed himself to feel even in matters of court, but he forced himself to remain still, reminding himself once again that revealing his identity now would accomplish nothing except allowing Serafina to reframe her cruelty as simple discipline before an audience powerful enough to challenge her. He found Ren later that night, sitting with Elias in the kitchen, gently treating a small cut on the boy's hand from where a piece of the broken dish had cut his skin during the fall. "She's going to work him without pay for 2 months, Damien said quietly, unable to keep the anger entirely out of his voice. "I know," Ren said. "I already spoke to the head cook. We are going to quietly split his usual duties among a few of us so he's not overworked trying to make up for lost wages elsewhere. It won't fix the situation, but it will make it survivable." Damien watched her walk, watched the practiced gentleness in her hands as she finished wrapping the boy's small wound, and felt something settle firmly into place inside him, a certainty he could no longer ignore or explain away. He was falling for a woman who was not his intended bride. The realization terrified him, not because it was unwelcome, but because of how impossible it made his current situation. He was days away from a wedding that could either secure peace between two powerful pact territories or unravel it entirely if broken carelessly. He could not simply abandon his duty because he had discovered feelings for a servant girl during an undercover mission meant only to observe, not to fall. And yet, watching Ren tend to Eliza's small injury with the same care she gave everyone around her, asking nothing in return, expecting no recognition, Damien understood with painful clarity that duty and desire had somehow become tangled together in a way he had never anticipated when he first put on this disguise. The tension came to a breaking point only days later, when Serafina, still humiliated over the broken dish and increasingly suspicious of the closeness between Ren and her personal maid, decided to test Ren's loyalty in the cruelest way she knew how. She summoned Ren to her private chambers and presented her with a choice framed as an opportunity. Serafina wanted Ren to report on Ren's activities, his conversations, anything unusual about his behavior, claiming she suspected him of stealing from the household stores. In exchange, Serafina promised to forgive a portion of the family debt that had bound Ren to this position for nearly 2 years. "All I need," Serafina said, "is honesty. Tell me what he says when he thinks no one important is listening." Ren, caught between loyalty to a man she barely knew and the desperate hope of freeing her family from years of remaining debt, hesitated long enough that Serafina noticed. "You care for him," Serafina said, understanding dawning slowly across her expression. "That's interesting. I care about doing my job well, my lady. Nothing more." "We'll see," Serafina said, and something in her tone suggested this conversation was far from finished. Damien learned of this exchange later that same night, when Ren found him near the stables, visibly shaken for the first time since he had known her. "She wants me to spy on you," Ren admitted quietly. "She thinks you're stealing something. I told her I wouldn't, but she's not the kind of woman who accepts refusal easily." "I know," Damien said, his mind already racing through the implications. If Serafina's suspicion continued to grow unchecked, she would eventually push hard enough to uncover something, whether the truth about his identity or simply enough reason to remove Ren from the household entirely to eliminate whatever threat she perceived. "Who are you really?" Ren asked, her voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. "You're not just a stable hand. I've known that for weeks. I just haven't wanted to ask, because I think some part of me already suspected I wouldn't like the answer." Damien looked at her for a long moment, torn between the safety of continued silence and the growing, undeniable need to finally tell her the truth. He thought of everything he had witnessed in this house, every quiet cruelty Ren had absorbed and softened for the people around her, every moment of unearned kindness she had shown a man whose real name she did not even know. He owed her honesty. He knew that now with absolute certainty. But he also knew that the moment he revealed his true identity, everything about his situation, and hers, would change irreversibly. "Soon," he said finally, unable to force the full truth out yet, though the promise in his voice was unmistakable. "I promise you, soon, you'll understand everything. But right now, revealing it could put both of us in more danger than you realize. Ren studied him, clearly unsatisfied but sensing the sincerity behind his hesitation. Whatever you're hiding, she said slowly, I hope it's worth the risk you're taking to hide it. Damien watched her walk away into the darkness of the estate, and felt, for the first time since arriving here disguised as a servant, that the walls of his deception were beginning to crack under a weight he had never anticipated carrying, the weight of a truth that now involved far more than simply exposing his future bride's cruelty. It involved protecting someone who had, without ever intending to, become far more important to him than the crown he was supposed to be securing through this entire dangerous test in the first place. The visiting dignitary arrived on a grey morning, 4 weeks into Damien's disguise, exactly 1 week before the wedding was scheduled to take place. Lord Whitfield Ambrose, an elder statesman from a southern Park territory whose support Damien needed for an upcoming trade agreement, had come to assess Serafina personally before the wider political alliance between their territories could be finalized. His approval mattered. His judgment carried weight across multiple Park councils, and Serafina understood exactly how important this visit was. She prepared for days, ensuring every corner of the estate reflected her at her most impressive. Every servant was drilled on expectations. Every meal was planned with obsessive precision. Damien watched the household tighten like a bowstring under the pressure of her demands, watched exhausted staff work longer hours than usual, watched Ren move between duties with barely enough time to breathe between them. The dinner itself, on the second night of Lord Ambrose's visit, unfolded with careful elegance. Serafina was radiant, charming, quick with intelligent conversation about trade routes and territorial boundaries, impressing the elder statesman exactly as she intended. Damien stood along the wall with the other serving staff, watching the performance with a familiar mixture of frustration and grim confirmation of everything he already knew. It was Ren, however, who unknowingly shifted the evening's balance. Lord Ambrose, walking the estate's grounds the following morning before his departure, encountered Ren tending quietly to a wounded bird she had found near the garden wall, its wing injured from a fall. She had not noticed him approaching, too focused on carefully splinting the small creature's wing with practiced, gentle hands, murmuring reassurance to it the same way she spoke to frightened servants and injured children throughout the estate. That's delicate work, Lord Ambrose said, startling her. Ren straightened immediately. My apologies, my lord, I didn't see you there. No need to apologize. I've rarely seen such careful hands. Are you trained in healing? A little, my lord. My mother taught me, before circumstances changed our family's situation. Lord Ambrose, genuinely impressed, spent nearly 20 minutes speaking with Ren about healing practices, her observations on herbal remedies, her calm and thoughtful manner of speaking, entirely unaware of the position she held within the household. When he returned inside, he mentioned the encounter to Serafina during their final conversation before departure, praising the composed, intelligent servant he had met in the garden, comparing her favorably, without any intention of insult, to Serafina's own more polished but noticeably colder demeanor. Your household clearly attracts thoughtful people, Lord Ambrose said. That young woman in your garden, tending the injured bird, she has a rare kind of grace. Genuine, not performed. Serafina's smile did not waver, but something behind her eyes turned to ice. The moment Lord Ambrose departed the estate, satisfied and impressed, Serafina's fury finally broke free of its careful containment. She summoned Ren to the main hall, in front of the assembled household staff, an audience Damien recognized immediately as intentional cruelty rather than simple discipline. You spoke with Lord Ambrose, Serafina said, her voice carrying none of its usual polished warmth now. He approached me, my lady. I answered his questions respectfully. I said nothing about you at all. You didn't need to say anything, Serafina snapped. You simply needed to exist, tending some pathetic little bird, playing the humble healer, letting him compare you to me without me even being present to defend myself. My lady, I didn't intend. I don't care what you intended, Serafina said, her composure finally cracking entirely under the weight of her humiliation. You will learn what happens when insolence embarrasses me in front of people whose opinions matter. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Damien barely had time to process it before instinct overrode every careful calculation he had maintained for 4 weeks. Serafina ordered 2 of the household guards to restrain Ren, declaring in front of the entire staff that she would be punished publicly as an example, a punishment severe enough to ensure no other servant would ever risk embarrassing her again. Damien moved before he fully decided to move, crossing the hall in several long strides, positioning himself directly between Ren and the approaching guards. "Stop," he said, and something in his voice, some deep authority he had carefully suppressed for weeks, carried through the hall with unmistakable command. The guards hesitated, confused by the tone coming from someone they believed to be nothing more than a stable hand. "Move aside," Serafina snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," Damien said, "because what you're about to do is wrong, and I won't stand here and watch it happen." Serafina stared at him, momentarily too stunned by his defiance to respond. "Have you lost your mind? Do you understand what happens to servants who interfere with their mistress's decisions?" "I understand exactly what happens," Damien said, "because I've watched this household for 4 weeks now, and I've seen every quiet cruelty you've dressed up as discipline. This ends now." It was at that precise moment, with the entire hall frozen in stunned silence, that Cassius arrived. He had ridden from the capital that morning, carrying urgent news regarding a border dispute that required the king's immediate attention, unaware of the scene he was about to walk into. He entered the main hall still dressed in official capital colors, his expression shifting from urgency to confusion as he took in the scene before him, guards frozen mid-motion, Serafina furious, and a stable hand standing protectively in front of a terrified maid. "Your Majesty," Cassius said, addressing Damien with the full weight of his true title, "we need to discuss the border situation immediately." The hall fell into absolute silence. Every servant, every guard, and Serafina herself turned to stare at the man they had known for 4 weeks as nothing more than a quiet stable hand named Ren. "Your Majesty." Serafina repeated slowly, the word barely making sense to her even as she spoke it aloud, her expression shifting rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as understanding settled fully into place. Damien straightened, allowing the disguise he had maintained for 4 weeks to finally fall away entirely, his true bearing and presence returning in an instant, unmistakable now to anyone watching. "Yes," he said simply. "I am Damien Ashgrove, Alpha King of the Northern Parks, and your future husband, or at least, I was." Serafina's composure shattered entirely, replaced almost instantly by a desperate scramble to salvage the situation. "Your Majesty, I can explain everything. This is simply a misunderstanding, a moment of frustration that doesn't reflect." "I've watched you for 4 weeks," Damien interrupted, his voice calm but absolutely final. "I've watched you dismiss servants over wrinkled dresses. I've watched you threaten a woman's family to control her loyalty. I've watched you order a child to work without wages over a broken dish, and now I've watched you order a woman restrained and punished simply because a visiting elder complimented her character instead of yours." "That's not who I am," Serafina insisted, tears forming with practiced precision. "You've seen me at my worst moments, under stress. That's not fair." "I've seen exactly who you are," Damien said. "Because I saw you when you believed no one important was watching. That's the truest version of anyone, Lady Cole. Not the version performed for kings and elders, but the version shown to those with no power to stop you." The hall remained frozen, servants exchanging disbelieving glances, guards uncertain whether to stand at attention or continue restraining Ren, who Damien immediately gestured to release, his expression softening only when he turned toward her. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Ren, still processing the reality that the quiet stable hand she had grown close to over the past month was, in fact, the Alpha King of the Northern Parks, could only shake her head slowly, entirely speechless. Serafina, watching this exchange, understood with sudden painful clarity exactly what she had lost, and exactly why. "You did this because of her," she said, voice sharp with betrayal despite everything she herself had done. "You disguised yourself, you tested me, all because of some servant girl." "I disguised myself because I refused to marry someone I only knew through carefully written letters and rehearsed counsel recommendations," Damien said. "What I found here had nothing to do with Ren initially. It had everything to do with who you truly are beneath every performance you've ever given me. Ren simply happened to remind me what genuine kindness actually looks like, in contrast to everything else I witnessed in this house." Serafina had no response left to give. The truth, laid bare in front of her entire household, left no room for further performance or explanation. Damien turned to Cassius. Send word to the council immediately. The wedding is off. The news reached the capital before Damien himself did, carried swiftly by messengers who could barely contain their disbelief at what they had witnessed. Within 2 days, both pack councils were in an uproar. The fragile peace agreement that the wedding had been designed to secure suddenly hanging by nothing more than urgent diplomatic scrambling and desperate reassurances that war between the territories was not the inevitable outcome of a broken engagement. Seraphina's family, humiliated beyond anything they had anticipated, responded with fury rather than reflection. Her father, Lord Cole, arrived at the capital demanding an audience with Damien, insisting that whatever had occurred at the estate was being exaggerated, that his daughter's character was being unfairly maligned based on isolated incidents taken out of context. Damien granted the audience, but he did not come alone. He arrived with sworn testimony from members of Seraphina's own household staff, carefully gathered by Cassius in the days following the incident, statements from the maid dismissed over a wrinkled gown, from Elias regarding his unpaid labor over the broken dish, from the elderly steward quietly replaced for the crime of aging, and from Wren herself, who despite her fear of retaliation, agreed to speak the truth once she understood the protection Damien's authority now afforded her and her family. These are not isolated incidents, Damien told Lord Cole, laying the gathered statements before him. This is a consistent pattern, spanning years, hidden carefully behind public performances designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of scrutiny. I have no interest in humiliating your family further than necessary, but I will not marry a woman who treats the powerless with such casual cruelty, regardless of what peace agreement rests on the decision. Lord Cole, faced with undeniable evidence and the quiet, unshakable authority of a king who clearly would not be moved by pressure or protest, eventually withdrew his demands, though the relationship between the two pack territories remained strained for weeks as new diplomatic arrangements were carefully negotiated to preserve the peace without requiring a marriage neither side any longer wanted. Seraphina herself disappeared from public life entirely following the scandal, retreating to a distant family property far from the capital's attention, her reputation, built for years on careful performance, unable to survive the truth that had finally caught up to it. Damien, meanwhile, found himself facing an entirely different challenge, one that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with a servant girl who had returned to her family's modest home following the collapse of Seraphina's household, uncertain of her future and deeply unsure of what, if anything, remained between herself and a king she had known for a month as nothing more than a quiet stable hand. He found her nearly 2 weeks later, in the small eastern territory where her family had relocated after losing their position in the healing profession years earlier. Her mother answered the door, visibly startled to find the alpha king of the northern pack standing on their modest doorstep, dressed simply, without the usual ceremonial trappings of his position. "I'm looking for Wren," Damien said. "If she's willing to see me." Wren appeared moments later, her expression carefully guarded, though Damien could see the same sharp intelligence and quiet steadiness that had first drawn his attention weeks earlier at the estate. "Your Majesty," she said, the former title feeling strange between them after weeks of simpler names. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know this is unusual," Damien said. "I know I owe you an explanation, and an apology, for the deception, for putting you in danger without your knowledge or consent." "You do," Wren agreed, though there was no bitterness in her voice, only honest acknowledgement. "But I understand why you did it. I've had time to think about everything that happened. I understand the weight you were carrying, trying to make the right decision for your entire kingdom." They walked together through the quiet countryside surrounding her family's small home, and Damien found himself explaining everything, the pressure from the council, his suspicion of Seraphina's carefully maintained reputation, his growing certainty during those 4 weeks that something was deeply wrong beneath the polished surface everyone had presented to him. "I never expected to find you," he admitted. "I went looking for the truth about Seraphina. I never anticipated finding someone like you in the process, someone who showed me exactly what genuine kindness looks like, without performance, without expectation of reward." Wren was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had said. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "You're a king. I'm a servant girl whose family is still working to repay old debts. This isn't a simple situation, regardless of what either of us might feel." "I'm not offering you a simple situation," Damien said. "I'm offering you the truth, which is that over 4 weeks of watching you move through a household that gave you every reason to become bitter, cruel, or simply exhausted beyond caring, you remained exactly who you were, kind without condition, protective of people who had nothing to offer you in return. That's precisely the quality I hoped to find in whoever I eventually chose to rule beside me. I searched for it in Serafina and found only performance. I found it in you without even looking. Are you asking me to marry you? Ren asked, her voice carrying equal parts disbelief and cautious hope. I'm asking you to consider it, Damien said. Not through arrangement, not through political necessity, but through genuine choice, mine and yours both. I understand this is enormous, and I understand you need time to consider everything this would mean for you and your family. Ren looked at him for a long moment, weighing everything he had said against the reality of what such a choice would mean, the scrutiny, the responsibility, the enormous shift from a life of quiet service to a life lived entirely in public view as queen of an entire kingdom. My family's debts, she said finally. Whatever happens between us, will you help them regardless? Absolutely, Damien said immediately. That was never a condition. Your family deserves relief from those debts regardless of what you decide about anything else. Something in Ren's expression softened at that answer, the confirmation that his interest in her had nothing to do with leverage or expectation, only genuine care. Then yes, she said quietly. I'll consider it. Properly, not rushed, not because a council needs a peace agreement, but because I want to understand what this could actually become between us. Over the following months, their relationship developed slowly, carefully, away from the pressures and performances that had defined Damien's arrangement with Serafina. He visited her family's modest home regularly, learned more about her training as a healer, watched her slowly step into a world entirely foreign to everything she had known, meeting pack elders, learning the customs and expectations of royal life, all while remaining fundamentally unchanged in her character, still finding ways to help others quietly, still refusing to let her growing status change how she treated people with less power than herself. The two pack councils, initially resistant to the idea of their king marrying a former servant rather than securing an alliance through noble marriage, gradually came around as Ren's genuine character became apparent through her actions rather than her title. She organized programs to support struggling families across the Northern Territories, drawing directly from her own experience with her family's debts. She established healing centers in villages that had previously lacked proper medical care, training local healers using the knowledge her mother had passed down to her. By the time their wedding finally took place, nearly a year after Damien had first disguised himself as a servant to test a woman he never should have trusted, the entire kingdom understood exactly why their king had made the choice he did. This was not a marriage built on political necessity or carefully performed reputation. It was a marriage built on witnessed character, on kindness proven through action rather than words, on a woman who had never once known she was being tested, and who had passed regardless, simply by remaining exactly who she was. Standing at the altar, surrounded by pack elders from territories that had once doubted this union entirely, Damien looked at Ren, radiant not because of practiced elegance, but because of an authenticity that had never once wavered, even under the harshest scrutiny an unknowing test could provide. I once believed, Damien said during his vows, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear, that a queen needed to be flawless, composed, perfectly trained in every expectation of nobility. I learned, watching this woman move through a household that gave her every reason to become hardened, that true nobility has nothing to do with birthright or performance. It has everything to do with how a person treats those who have no power to demand better treatment. Ren, tears of genuine emotion rather than practiced performance shining in her eyes, took his hand as the ceremony concluded, and the entire kingdom watched as a servant girl who had once tended wounded birds in a quiet garden became queen not through arrangement, but through a truth that had revealed itself slowly, undeniably, over 4 weeks that had changed everything Damien Ashgrove believed about who deserved to rule beside him. The peace between the Northern Territories held, secured not through a marriage of convenience, but through a kingdom's growing understanding that their king valued genuine character over practiced perfection, a lesson that would shape the Northern Parks for generations to come, long after the story of the disguised king and the servant girl had become legend told across every territory that had once doubted the unusual path their love had taken.